Pax Christi was started at the end of the Second World War, and it was started by an inspiring woman called Martha Dortel-Clodeau. She was a literature teacher at a school in the southwest of France, in a town called Agen, where she lived, and she was very patriotic. Her father had been a general. She came from a military background, very patriotic, very much opposed to the occupation of France and the collaboration of French people with the Nazis. So, okay, it's the winter of 1944, so the war's been going on for 5 years already. Everyone is very tired of war. But she's also brought up to be quite antagonistic to the Germans. She's a very spiritual and thoughtful and reflective woman, and in the winter of 1944, it's coming up to Christmas, and she's reflecting and thinking more and more, she finds, about what this Christmas must be like for the German people. And it's really that thoughtfulness for other people and putting herself in other people's shoes that is the seed of inspiration for this peace movement, because she's thinking how terrible Christmas must be for people in Germany who've been also deprived and bombed and suffered the war. And she starts a little prayer group in her church, in her parish, with the authorization of the priest, who's all for it. And in the first group, there's herself, there's a war widow, there's a younger woman who's the daughter of a man who's been deported as forced labour from France to Germany, and a group of Carmelite sisters. So they're people who have known the suffering of war. So she starts this little prayer group, winter of 1944 into 1945, and the idea grows in her head. How are we going to ever, at the end of this war, create peace between Germany and France? So that's the seed of the thing. So they're reflecting and praying and thinking about it, and then she thinks, well, let's spread this idea of prayer for Germany and the German people after 12 years of Nazi rule. How are they going to be healed? And she goes then to the priest again, who says, yes, great idea, let's spread it throughout France. She then goes to the local bishop. And here's a sort of coincidence or providence or whatever you like to call it, because the bishop is a man called Theas, Bishop Theas. And he had been very outspoken at the beginning of the war and through the war against the deportation of people to Germany and against the roundup of the Jews. And the consequence was that he was arrested and spent quite some months in a detention. He wasn't in a concentration camp, he was released. But while he was in detention, other prisoners from all kinds of backgrounds had come to him and said, well, can you help us to pray? And he said, well, the only thing we can do is to pray the same kind of prayer that we were taught for peace and reconciliation with everybody. And that didn't go down well, but that's what he did. And it was very impressive. So here was a man, here's a woman talking about reconciliation, coming to a man who's also seen the need for some kind of long-term reconciliation and healing. And he says, great idea. So instantly, the idea for a crusade of prayer for Germany in the first instance took root. So it's Easter 1945, the war isn't yet ended, and this seed is sown. So they call it Pax Christi very quickly, but it's still crusade of prayer for Germany. And then as the idea gets spread around and she communicates with other parts of France, first of all, people say, well, it's not just prayers for Germany. We need reconciliation and healing too. And so within a very short time, it becomes a movement, a crusade of prayer for all nations, all nations. She's quite a pushy woman. So she approaches lots of people in France, lots of bishops through the church. And as the war comes to end, they start having exchanges with German Christian church people. And the first kind of things they do are acts of reconciliation, pilgrimages like to Lourdes. in 1946, the year after the war, there's a big international pilgrimage that she helps to organise, bringing groups from about a dozen countries, including England, to Vézelay, a big pilgrimage centre in France, bringing heavy crosses, a peace pilgrimage, a huge thing to organise. Anyway, she's involved in that. And to cut a long story short, within about 5 years, this movement starts catching fire and taking off. And it becomes clear that it's going to be a movement for action, not just prayer, but also putting your prayer into action. It's going to become more of a movement, a peace movement. So by 1950, there's a proper headquarters starting up in Paris, and she withdraws, goes back to her teaching, her family life, and the movement takes on a new lease of life, and the rest is history. Enough.